The gown was a prison of silk and sequins. Elara adjusted the strap, her fingers cold against her own skin. In the mirror of her borrowed room, a stranger stared back, a woman crafted from moonlight and shadow, with eyes that held a quiet storm. She looked the part. That was the problem. She was dressed for the most sacred night in the supernatural world, the Alpha Prime Ball, and she had never felt more like a fraud. Around her, the mansion thrummed with a palpable energy, a frequency of raw destiny that vibrated in the very air. It itched against her senses, a symphony she was forever locked out of. For Elara was a null. In a world where every shifter, vampire, and fae could feel the pull of their fated mate, a soul-deep resonance that guided them to their other half, she felt nothing. An eternal, silent static. Her aunt's sharp voice echoed in her memory. "You will go, Elara. You will smile. You are a daughter of the Fallon line, null or not. We need this alliance." Duress? It came packaged as duty, veiled in family honor. She was here as a decorative piece, a potential bargaining chip for a political match, since a true mate bond was an impossibility. A fact her relatives never let her forget. Stepping into the ballroom was like diving into a sea of light and longing. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, scattering prisms across a swirling tapestry of supernatural elite. And the bonds? Oh, the bonds were everywhere. She couldn't feel them, but she could see them. The way a wolf shifter's gaze would snag across the room, locking onto a witch with instant possessive heat. The way a vampire's cold smile would thaw into genuine warmth as their destined partner approached. It was in the whispered sighs, the clasped hands that sparked with visible, tiny arcs of magic, the tears of joy glistening on cheeks. It was a celebration of finding the missing piece of your soul, and Elara was a fragment that belonged to no puzzle. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, the whispers following her. The Fallon null. Pity, such a face wasted. I hear her bloodline is desperate. She accepted a flute of sparkling fairy wine she wouldn't drink, her smile a brittle mannequin's. She watched as Lyra, a cousin she barely knew, was swept into the arms of her mountain cat shifter mate, the two of them laughing with a joy so bright it felt like a physical blow. Elara's chest ached with a hollow, familiar void. This was her life, a spectator to the most profound connection her world knew. Then a change rippled through the room. The music seemed to dip. The crowd near the main entrance parted like a wave before a storm. They had arrived, someone whispered. The Triplet Alphas of the Blackwood legacy. Kael, Rhys, and Soren. They moved in a synchronized, predatory harmony that commanded silence. Kael, all ruthless angles and simmering violence, his gaze a sweeping challenge. Rhys, calculating and elegant, surveying the room like a chessboard. Soren, whose solemn eyes held an unexpected depth, a calm that seemed to anchor the storm of the other two. They were legends. Cursed, some whispered, bound by a fate that made them share everything, power, territory, and, it was said, a single shared destiny. Elara's breath caught, not from attraction but from a primal awareness of danger, of sheer overwhelming power. This was what true apex predators looked like. And then it happened. As their three pairs of eyes, in terrible unison, found hers across the crowded ballroom, the world ended, the silent static in her soul shattered. Not with one pull, but with three. Simultaneous, cataclysmic. It was a cord of blazing possessive fire, a chain of ice-cold, unbreakable certainty, a root of deep claiming earth. They slammed into the core of her being, wrapping around her heart, her spirit, her very bones, and from each, a single deafening, soul-rending command that was not a sound, but the very voice of fate itself. Mine, 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 sound of Elara's glass shattering on the floor. The flute slipped from her numb fingers, exploding on marble in a burst of crystal and sparkling wine. The room tilted. The noise, the light, the bonds of everyone else, it all faded into a distant roar. There was only the triple pulse, an impossible, terrifying, magnificent harmony beating in time with her own frantic heart. She stood utterly alone, a statue of shock in the center of the parting crowd, the vibrant bonds of others now seeming like feeble candles next to the three suns that had just ignited inside her. The silence in her soul was gone. It had been replaced by a roaring, conflicting divine claim. And from across the room, 3 sets of alpha eyes, wide with identical, world-altering recognition, stared back. For 22 years, Elara had felt nothing. Now she felt everything, and it was about to tear her world apart. The world had narrowed to a tunnel. At the far end, the 3 alpha figures stood immobile. The psychic chords, blaze, ice, root, thrummed inside Elara's chest, a tangled claim stealing her breath. Across the ballroom, the Triplet Alphas were experiencing their own cataclysm. For Kael, the volatile warrior, the response was primal. An internal, guttural roar. Mine. Found. Take. A snarl ripped from his human throat, low and dangerous. His molten gaze locked onto her with the focus of a missile. For Rhys, the strategist, it was a system shock. His mind, a flawless computer, rebooted with terrifying new data. Impossible. Statistical anomaly. Triad bond confirmed. Immediate threat assessment, political upheaval. Solution, control the narrative. His mercury eyes coolly scanned the crisis, calculating. For Soren, the empathetic anchor, it was an emotional flood. He felt the echo of Elara's panic through the bond. The silence. It's been filled. A symphony. And she's terrified. His heart clenched with an aching need to soothe. His green eyes trying to send a pulse of calm back to her. The crowd's murmur returned, rising in a wave of whispers. A high, fey voice hissed, "Did you feel that surge?" A gruff shifter muttered, "By the moon." From all 3 of them, a sly vampire's tone cut through. A Fallon pawn catching the Blackwood Kings? This is a power play. The words slithered around Elara, meaningless next to the bonds. She took a stumbling step back. The movement broke the tableau. Kael took a predatory step forward. Instantly, Rhys's hand shot out, clamping on Kael's forearm. His voice was a blade of steel, low but clear. "Not like that. You'll start a war in the ballroom." Kael's reply was a feral growl. "She's ours. And she's frightened. Can't you feel it? I'm going to her." Soren's voice, softer but carrying, intervened. "He's right, Kael, but so are you. Look at her." All 3 looked. And in that shared glance, a lifetime of understanding passed between them. Rhys's mind raced. There was only one move. His mercury eyes met Kael's fire and Soren's earth. A silent, grim agreement. They moved as one entity. Elara watched, paralyzed, as destiny walked toward her. They stopped before her, a wall of overwhelming power and scent, smoke and amber, frost and parchment, pine and rain-soaked earth. Kael leaned in closest. His voice was a rough caress, a growl meant for her alone. "Don't run!" It wasn't a request. It was a primal command from the bond itself, glowing. "What am I supposed to do in this beautiful prison?" The silence was heavy. Rhys broke it, his voice losing a fraction of its chill. "You live, you stay, and you let us figure out what fate has done to us all. Mara will show you to your suite. Your belongings will be fetched. We will reconvene for dinner. It is expected that our mate dines with us." It was a dismissal. The meeting was over. The cage had its bars. A soft chime sounded. Mara appeared. "The Moonlight Suite is ready." Elara looked at the 3 alpha brothers, the volatile warrior, the strategic mind, the empathetic anchor, a united front, but in their eyes, she saw the clear, dangerous friction. Without another word, she turned and followed Mara out. The Moonlight Suite was a masterpiece. A wall of glass looked out, over a moonlit forest, exquisite furnishings, a marble bathroom, a small library, a suite fit for a queen. As Mara left, the door ceiling shut, Elara walked to the center of the vast room. She was alone again. But for the first time, the silence was an illusion. Beneath the hum of the fortress, she could feel it. The triple pulse. One beat of fierce fire, one of steady ice, one of deep earth. A rhythm not her own, yet now part of her. She was safe. She was claimed. She was trapped. And in the study far below, 3 brothers began the first argument of their new reality, their raised voices a muffled rumble in the bones of the house. The gilded cage was secure, and the game of pretend had just begun. Sleep was impossible. Elara lay in the center of the vast bed, staring at the ceiling. The triple pulse in her chest was a constant drum, a fiery thrum from one direction, a cool rhythm from another, a deep beat from a third. The moonlight suite was too quiet, too perfect. A sudden sharp sound broke the silence. A raised voice, muffled but unmistakable. Kael. Driven by instinct, Elara slipped from the bed. She crept to the interior wall, pressing her ear to the cool surface. The voices echoed up from somewhere deep below. Kael's voice, angry and muffled, came first. Not a damn asset to be managed, Rhys. She's a living part of the curse now. Our shared doom walks in heels and smells like moonlight. Elara's breath hitched. Curse. Shared doom. Rhys's cooler, clipped voice answered. Precisely. Which is why she must be managed. The ancestral pact doesn't account for this. It's a variable that could shatter our balance. Our loyalty is already being tested. Then Soren's voice, tired and pleading. She's not a variable. She's scared. I can feel it through the bond. Calling her a doom isn't helping. The pact binds us in all things, yes, but maybe she's the key to breaking it, not fulfilling it. Kael replied with a bitter laugh. Or she's the final trigger. The old burden gets a new face. We share everything. Power, pain, mate. How long before sharing turns to fighting? I felt it at the ball. The pull. It's not equal, and it wants to be. A heavy silence fell. Rhys's voice returned, final and decisive. Enough. Speculation is useless. We observe. We control. And we research. The pact's origin texts are in the vault. I'll review them. Until then, the rules stand. She stays. She obeys. And we do not let the curse use her to tear us apart. A door closed. Footsteps retreated. Then silence. Elara slid down the wall to the floor. Arms wrapped around her knees. Curse, pact, shared doom. The words echoed. They were bound by a dark history, and she had been grafted onto it. The sterile fortress now felt haunted. She couldn't just wait. If there was a truth buried here, she would find it. At dawn, she was dressed. Mara arrived with a breakfast tray. The Alphas are occupied until midday, Mara stated. The West Wing Library is available for your use. It was an instruction. Elara nodded. The library was vast. Elara ignored the popular volumes. Her eyes scanned the highest, dustiest shelves. She found a ladder and climbed. Her fingers brushed over ancient leather spines. One, wedged behind a larger book, caught her eye. On the nature of shared bonds, myths and histories. Her pulse leapt. She tugged it free, a cloud of dust dancing in a sunbeam. She settled into a secluded alcove and opened the brittle pages. The text was dense. She skimmed chapters until a subheading made her blood run cold. The price of triune power, the Blackwood Compact. Her eyes flew over the words. The three sons made a pact with forces best left unnamed. Bound their bloodline for all generations. Strength multiplied, but at the cost of singular destiny. All things thereafter to be held in common. Land, title, victory, sorrow, and mate. Thus the Triple Alpha line was born. A blessing of power and a curse of shared fate. The bond, when it manifests, is a triple mark, a divine paradox. The potential for great unity or ultimate ruin. Historical accounts suggest instability. The shared mate bond becomes a crucible, testing the brothers' loyalty against their individual claim. Often ends in bloodshed. Elara slammed the book shut, her hands trembling. A crucible. Ultimate ruin. Ends in bloodshed. This was the old burden. The, shared doom. The pact didn't just bind them to share a mate. It set the stage for them to destroy each other over her. She was the final test of a centuries-old curse. The proof was in the 3 marks on her wrist. Footsteps approached on the library's marble floor. Measured, familiar. Rhys. Elara quickly shoved the book behind a cushion, smoothing her features just as he appeared between the shelves. He looked impeccable, with faint shadows under his eyes. He studied her. Mara said you were reading. I trust the library is to your liking. His voice was polite control. But now Elara heard the centuries of weight behind it. The weight of the compact. The weight of the doom he was trying to manage. She looked at him, this strategist bound by a curse, and saw a prisoner of his own bloodline. And she, with her triple-marked wrist, was his new cellmate. She forced a small, tight smile. It's very enlightening. Dinner was a silent, exquisite torture. The long obsidian table could seat 20. Tonight there were 4. Elara sat at one side, the 3 brothers arrayed across from her like a tribunal. The food was perfect, artfully arranged, and tasted like ash in her mouth. Rhys sat directly opposite, his posture rigidly correct, his eyes occasionally flicking from his plate to her face, assessing. Kael was to his right, a live wire of restless energy, his gaze a physical weight that made the skin on her arms prickle. Soren was to Rhys's left, the only one who seemed to be making an effort. He'd asked her a quiet question about the library, and when she'd given a short reply, he'd offered a small, genuine smile. The bond was a low hum in her chest, a tangled knot of their unspoken tensions. Rhys's strand felt like coiled wire, tightly controlled. Kael's was a simmering, impatient heat. Soren's was a gentle, steady current, the only one that didn't feel like it was scraping against her nerves. The meal was nearly over when it happened. A servant approached to refill the water glasses. As he leaned between Elara and Soren, his elbow jostled Soren's arm. Soren's hand, resting on the table, was knocked forward. The back of his knuckles brushed against Elara's bare forearm. Contact. The effect was instantaneous. A shock, but not of electricity. It was a wave of profound, calming warmth that flowed from the point of contact, up her arm, and directly into the frantic knot of the bond in her chest. It was the feeling of a deep, steadying breath after crying. The feeling of sunlight on cold skin. The chaotic hum didn't silence, but it softened. The edges of her anxiety were soothed. For a single blissful second, she felt not terror, but a sense of profound rightness. Soren's eyes flew to hers, wide with the same shock, then softened with understanding. He didn't pull away immediately. "My apologies," he murmured, his voice low and intimate in the quiet room. The warmth lingered for a heartbeat after he withdrew his hand. The calm ebbed, but the memory of it was seared into her nerves. That was Soren, the anchor. Kael had watched the entire exchange, his golden eyes narrowed. He pushed his chair back abruptly, the legs scraping loudly on the stone floor. "I'm done." He stood and began to stride around the head of the table, not toward the door, but toward Elara's side of the room, as if drawn by a magnet. Rhys's voice cut the air. "Kael, don't." It was a command. Kael ignored it. He stopped beside her chair. He didn't speak. He simply held out his hand, palm up, a clear, challenging demand. His expression was fierce, unreadable. Her heart hammered. This was no accident. Other forms exploded forward, having moved unseen on Rhys's silent order. A sleek silver-gray wolf with icy blue eyes, Rhys. A powerful, deep brown wolf with intelligent green eyes, Soren. They did not attack as 3 individuals. They moved as one mind. As Corbin and his men scrambled to shift, the triad was already upon them. Rhys, the strategist, moved like a phantom, disabling 2 men with precise, crippling blows to their legs before they could fully change. Soren was a battering ram of controlled force, taking on 3 at once, his movements efficient and brutal, putting them down with concussive force. But Kael went straight for Corbin. It wasn't a fight. It was a massacre. The black wolf was a whirlwind of fang and fury. He moved faster than Elara's eyes could track. She heard snarls, the awful sound of tearing, a sharp cry that was cut off. She watched frozen, one hand clamped over her mouth. Within 60 seconds it was over. Corbin's men were scattered on the ground, moaning. Most shifted back to human form in their pain. Corbin himself was on his knees before Kael's wolf form, one arm hanging at a sickening angle. The black wolf placed a massive paw on Corbin's chest and leaned down, his muzzle inches from the man's face. From the parapet, Rhys's voice rang out, cold and clear. "Deliver a message to your alpha. Look at her." At his words, Kael's wolf head snapped up. All 3 brothers, the black wolf, the gray, the brown, turned their glowing eyes upward to the parapet, to where Elara stood between Soren's human form and a stone-faced guard. They were reminding the intruders of what they had come to see. The claim. The unity. But as Kael's golden wolf eyes found hers, something shifted. The fierce intelligence was there. But beneath it, swimming up from the depths, was something else. Something raw, unrestrained, and utterly bestial. It wasn't just the wolf. It was the curse. The primal, possessive fury of the bond, unleashed by violence and the threat to what was his, theirs. For a horrifying second, Elara saw not Kael, but the ancient, savage burden he carried. The beast the pact had forged. A chill colder than the night air shot down her spine. She took an involuntary step back. That single fearful movement broke the spell. Kael blinked. The bestial shadow receded, replaced by a flicker of something that looked almost like shame, before his gaze hardened again into wolfish indifference. He turned back to Corbin, issuing a final, rumbling growl before stepping off him. Rhys gave another signal. The pack warriors below opened the gates and began dragging the injured intruders away. It was over. The threat was neutralized. The message was sent. But as Elara was led back inside, the image was burned behind her eyes. Not the coordinated might of the triad, but that single terrifying flash in Kael's eyes. It was a glimpse behind the pretend, behind the alpha, to the raw, cursed truth of what the bond could unleash. The fortress was safe. Their defense was absolute. But for the first time, Elara was truly afraid. Not of the rivals at the gate, but of the storm that lived within the walls, and the part of it that lived inside her now. A week passed, a week of tense silence, of stolen glances, and of the terrifying memory of Kael's wolf eyes. The fortress was on lockdown, but the world outside did not stop. Tradition, especially for the old shifter families, was a relentless force. The choosing ceremony was upon them. Elara stood before a full-length mirror in a room adjacent to the Great Hall. Her gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk, cut to accentuate every curve, sewn with tiny crystals that shimmered like captured starlight. Mara had arranged her hair into an intricate cascade of curls. She looked every inch the chosen mate of powerful alphas. She felt like a sacrificial lamb, trussed in finery. Soren entered quietly, already dressed in formal black attire edged with silver. He came to stand behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice sincere. He could feel her anxiety through the bond. It was a skittering, cold thread alongside his own steady calm. "I feel like I'm going to my own execution," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. His hand hovered near her shoulder, not touching. But the warmth of him was a comfort. "It's a formality. A public ratification of the bond witnessed at the ball. Once it's done, the challenges lose legitimacy. And if they don't accept it?" she asked, turning to face him. Before he could answer, the door opened again. Rhys and Kael entered together. Rhys was in immaculate gray, looking like a glacier given form. Kael wore deep burgundy, the color of old wine, or blood. His gaze swept over Elara, intense and unreadable, lingering for a moment on the marks he knew were hidden under her long glove. He had been distant since the attack, avoiding her. "It's time," Rhys stated. "Remember the rules. You walk with us. You stand with us. You say nothing unless directly addressed. Your role is to be present, to be seen as ours." His words were a cold reminder. She was a piece in their political strategy, property to be displayed. The Great Hall had been transformed. Hundreds of shifters from allied and neutral packs filled the space, the air thick with incense and low conversation. At the far end, on a raised dais, sat the Council of Elders, ancient shifters whose eyes held the weight of centuries. A drumbeat echoed through the hall, silencing the crowd. The ceremony began. One by one, other mated pairs from prominent families were called forward. The alpha would present their mate. A few traditional words were spoken. The elder would bless the union, and the crowd would applaud. It was simple, sacred, and singular. Then, the head elder, a woman with silver hair and eyes like flint, called out in a voice that creaked with age, "Alpha Triad of the Blackwood Legacy. Present your claim." A ripple of absolute silence, then a wave of whispers spread through the hall. This was the moment everyone had come to see. Rhys, Kael, and Soren moved as one, forming a triangle around Elara, and guided her down the long central aisle. Every eye was upon them. She felt the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their disgust. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, on the elders, her back straight as a rod. They stopped before the dais. The three brothers stood shoulder to shoulder in front of her, a living wall. The head elder, Lyra, looked down at them, her expression inscrutable. The bond witnessed at the Alpha Prime Ball was unprecedented. The triple mark has been verified. She paused, letting the tension build. But the choosing ceremony is a covenant between an alpha and his fated mate. It is a declaration of singular devotion, of a soul's chosen path. The laws are ancient and clear. They speak of a pair. She leaned forward, her gaze piercing. How can three declare devotion to one? How can one soul be the fated path for three? Does this not dilute the sacredness? Does this not make a mockery of the very tradition we are here to uphold? The challenge hung in the air, stark and deadly. This wasn't a rival pack thug. This was an elder, questioning the foundation of their claim on legal, spiritual grounds. Kael's shoulder tensed. Soren's calm wavered into concern. It was Rhys who stepped forward just half a pace. His voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the silent hall, crisp and analytical. Elder Lyra, the laws as written describe the common manifestation of fate for common bonds. They are a framework, not a cage. The Blackwood bloodline, by the ancient and binding compact you yourself witnessed, ratified 3 generations ago, exists outside that common framework. Our destiny is and has always been triune. He continued, his tone becoming chillingly logical. The bond is not 3 separate claims on one individual. It is one single tripartite bond between 4 souls, a quadrilateral covenant. To try and fracture it into separate, singular parts is to misunderstand its fundamental nature. Elara Fallon is not a mate divided. She is the unifying apex of our triad. Her acceptance of the triple mark is her ratification. Our presence here unified is ours. He paused, his mercury eyes sweeping the crowd. Therefore, we are not 3 alphas presenting one mate. We are one triad, presenting our 4th. We choose as one. We claim to be one. The devotion is not diluted. It is multiplied, as is our strength, our protection, and our resolve. Any challenge to her legitimacy, he finished, his gaze returning to Elder Lyra, is a challenge to the foundational compact that has governed our line and its treaties. With this council, for over 200 years, do you wish to challenge the compact? The silence was absolute. Rhys had not defended their love or destiny. He had defended a legal loophole in an ancient curse. He had framed her not as a beloved, but as the unifying apex of a political and mystical structure. A necessary component, a keystone in their architecture of power. Elara felt the words like physical blows. Quadrilateral covenant, unifying apex. She was a geopolitical instrument, a puzzle piece that completed their cursed set. The warmth of Soren, the fire of Kael, the clarity of Rhys, all of it was reduced to cold, hard necessity by his argument. Elder Lyra stared at Rhys for a long, tense moment. Then slowly she leaned back. The law was on his side. The cursed compact was a legal reality. To deny it was to risk upheaval. The bond, she intoned, her voice resigned, is recognized. The choosing is ratified. The ceremonial drumbeat resumed. The crowd broke into obligatory muted applause. It was done. But as they turned to walk back up the aisle, the victory felt like ashes. Elara looked at Rhys's profile, at the cool satisfaction there. He had won. He had secured their position. And in doing so, he had made her feel more like property than ever before. The gilded cage now had a legal deed, and her name was on it as a chattel, not an owner. The walk back to their private wing of the fortress was a march, through a tunnel of silent triumph and private. Ruin, Rhys's legal victory, was a cold stone in Elara's stomach. The words unifying apex and quadrilateral covenant echoed in her mind, stripping the raw, terrifying magic of the bond into something sterile and transactional. Kael had vanished the moment the great hall doors shut behind them, a blur of restless energy seeking an outlet for a triumph that felt like defeat. Rhys had given her one measured, assessing look, checking, that his asset was intact before, striding toward his study, already mentally moving to the next strategic objective. Elara stood alone in the grand empty corridor, the crystals on her gown feeling like chains. The weight of the performance, of being viewed as a thing, a component, pressed down on her until she could barely breathe. A gentle touch on her elbow made her jump. It was Soren. He had lingered. His green eyes, always so full of quiet perception, now held a deep, empathetic sorrow. He didn't speak. He simply took her hand. His touch immediately sending that now familiar wave of calming warmth through the bond, a direct counter to the icy aftermath of Rhys's words. "Come with me," he said softly, his voice a balm in the sterile silence. "You need air that isn't strategized." He led her not to the main gardens, but down a lesser-used corridor, through a nondescript door she'd never noticed, and into a space that took her breath away. Soren's sanctuary was a hidden, glass-domed biosphere nestled within the fortress's steel heart. It was a wild, thriving contradiction to the cold order outside. Lush ferns brushed her shoulders. The air was humid and fragrant with blooming, night-blooming jasmine and rich earth. A small, clear stream trickled over smooth stones. Fireflies, real, living fireflies, dotted the shadows like drifting stars. It was alive. It was untamed. It was peaceful. "No one comes here but me," Soren said, releasing her hand to run his fingers along a broad, waxy leaf. "Not even my brothers. Rhys finds it inefficient. Kael finds it too quiet." A small, sad smile touched his lips. Elara took a deep, shuddering breath, the first real one she'd taken all evening. The tightness in her chest began to ease. "It's beautiful," she whispered, meaning it more than she could say. "It's real," he corrected gently, turning to face her. In the dappled moonlight filtering through the glass, he looked less like an alpha and more like an ancient forest spirit. Out there, what Rhys did today, that wasn't real. That was the armor. The curse demands it. The politics demand it. He stepped closer, his expression open, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "I felt your distress." After he spoke, it was a crushing feeling, like being put in a box with a label. Tears, hot and sudden, pricked at her eyes. He had felt it. He had named it. "He made me feel like property," she confessed, the words raw. "A necessary piece? Not a person." Soren nodded, his own pain reflecting in his eyes. "I know, and I am sorry. That is Rhys's burden, to see the world as a chessboard, to survive the game our ancestors started. But it is not all we are." He reached out, carefully tucking a stray curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered near her cheek. "My fear, my greatest fear in all of this, is not that the bond will make us fight." He took a shaky breath. "My fear is that its intensity, the pressure of the pact and the politics and the sheer force of what Kael and Rhys are, will overwhelm you, that it will erase you, Elara, that you will become only the mate, the apex, and the woman who stood alone at the ball will disappear." His confession hung in the fragrant air. It was the most honest, terrifying thing anyone had said to her since this began. He wasn't worried about his own claim or his brother's rivalry. He was worried for her. The understanding broke something open inside her. A dam of isolation gave way. She wasn't alone in her fear. He saw her, not as a prize or a problem, but as a person in peril. "I feel it sometimes," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Like their wills are a riptide. Kael's fire, Rhys's ice. They're so strong. And this bond, it wants to pull me under." "Then you must grow stronger than the tide," he murmured, his hand moving to cup her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. His warmth flowed into her, not to overwhelm, but to fortify. "You must remember who you are. The null who wasn't, the woman who stood alone. You must find your own anchor within the bond, not just cling to mine." The space between them vanished. She was leaning into his touch, drawn by his kindness, his understanding, the solid, living peace he embodied. The scent of jasmine and wet earth surrounded them. His gaze dropped to her lips. It was a tender, slow gravitation, an almost kiss, a breath away from connection. Their lips were a hair's breadth apart when a sharp, discordant sound shattered the sanctuary's peace. The distant, angry slam of a door from deep within the fortress. Kael's frustration. a psychic shiver through the bond. The spell broke. Soren pulled back, but only slightly, his forehead resting against hers. His breath was warm on her skin. The almost kiss remained, a promise suspended in the humid air. "You are not property," he whispered fiercely. "You are our heart, and a heart must be free to beat. Remember this place. It is yours whenever you need to remember who you are." He stepped back, the alpha mask not returning, but a new, protective resolve settling in his eyes. The tender moment was over, but its echo was now woven into the bond, a thread of warmth, of sanctuary, of a promise that she would not be erased. The memory of Soren's sanctuary, of his words and the almost kiss, was a warm ember in Elara's chest. It was a secret shield against the coldness of the fortress. But the world of the triad did not run on warmth alone. It ran on power, strategy, and cold, hard fact. 2 days after the choosing ceremony, a formal summons came via Mara, not a request. A summons. Alpha Rhys requests your presence in the main library at 3, for tutelage. Elara's stomach tightened. Tutelage. Like she was a student or a recruit. She dressed simply, in a dark sweater and trousers, a quiet rebellion against the glittering gowns of the ceremony. The main library was different from the cozy West Wing. It was Rhys's domain, vast, ordered, silent. He stood by a large, polished table, upon which were spread maps, old treaties on parchment and modern dossiers. He didn't look up as she entered. "Sit," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet. He gestured to a chair opposite him. She sat. He finally lifted his gaze, his mercury eyes assessing. There was no warmth, no hostility, just pure focused calculation. "You are a variable in a centuries-old equation," he began without preamble. "To survive, you must understand the equation. Ignorance is the greatest threat to this union, and to your safety." He tapped the largest map. It showed their territory, Blackwood, and the lands of their neighbors, the coastal pack of Silvermane, the forest-dwelling Nightclaw tribe, the vampiric citadel to the south. "The choosing ceremony silenced open challenge through law," Rhys explained, his finger tracing borders. "It did not eliminate ambition. Silvermane's alpha, Soren, believed his daughter would be Kael's mate. He sees our bond as a personal insult and a strategic blockage. The Nightclaw elder believes a triune bond is an abomination that weakens the natural order. They preach this to their allies." He slid a dossier toward her. It contained profiles, photos, lists of assets. "And the vampires," he continued, his voice dropping, "see opportunity. A destabilized shifter territory is ripe for expansion. They are patient. They will watch for cracks." Elara stared at the documents, the names and faces blurring. It was a web of hostility she had never considered. "And I'm the crack," she said quietly. Rhys's gaze sharpened, a flicker of something, approval, in his eyes. "Precisely. You are perceived as the untested element, the human-born null who somehow triggered an unstable bond in a cursed bloodline. You are seen as either a lucky charm or a fatal flaw. Our enemies will probe you, test your influence, seek to turn you, or use you to turn us against each other." He leaned forward, his intense focus entirely on her. "Which is why you must be more. You must understand the alliances, the trade routes, the history of slights and treaties. You must be able to speak to an elder without revealing fear, to a rival without showing weakness. You must become politically literate." For the next hour, he tutored her. He explained the nuances of pack hierarchy, the significance of lunar phases in diplomacy, the delicate balance with the non-shifter supernaturals. He was a brilliant, demanding teacher. His logic was impeccable, his knowledge vast. And something unexpected happened. As Elara listened, asked a sharp question, challenged a point about an old treaty, she felt a different thread of the bond activate. Not Soren's calming warmth or Kael's hungry fire. This was a sharp, clean line of intellectual synergy. It was the thrill of a complex puzzle being solved, of two minds aligning on a point of strategy. When she correctly predicted Soren of Silvermane's most likely next move based on the grain trade data, Rhys went utterly still. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as an asset or a variable, but as an intellect. "You see it?" he said, his voice devoid of its usual chill, tinged with something like surprise. You grasped the geometry of power. It was a different kind of intimacy, deeper than physical touch in some ways. He was sharing the inner workings of his world, the chessboard of his mind, and she was keeping up. The connection was heady, empowering. But then he leaned back, the shutters coming down again. The moment of synergy faded, replaced by grim reality. "This is why you are more than a mate. Elara," he said, his voice low and serious. "You are now, whether you wish it or not, a weapon. The most potent one in our arsenal." She blinked, the intellectual high crashing. "A weapon?"